Well, but I thought that thinking about how an organic place to start would be about the idea of language and translation. Because thinking about when I started doing contemporary dance, and like many people, I thought that dance was about telling great stories. And what did I know about Martha Graham? Right? And Martha Graham, when she came to my university, she was doing her mythological pieces.
Right.
So as a young 19-year-old looking at, oh, this is what dance is.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, lo and behold, by the time I was evolving more as an artist, there was the postmoderns at that time were talking about non-narrative, non-symbols,
Yes.
no to symbols, no to narrative, no to psychology, and so on. And I know that in my own practice right now, the work I'm constantly making, I'm trying to still subject it to turn off the sound, and what would you see? What does the movement look like? What is the congress? But I am really interested in how the abstract movement and a real text actually something else is created. Now, as I've said, we're very excited to have you here because you represent a non-Western form, but you're a practitioner who is pushing the form. And I don't know, what about translation? What about symbolism and movement, and what does it mean to you?
Gosh, coming from India, I think everything is symbolic,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I think it's very, very interesting question, Bill, because it's been in my forefront for the last few years. I started my dance training, well, my mother sent me because I was a hyperactive kid.
You were?
I was. I'm calm now. But she thought, well, she's always running around and jumping about, so why don't I just send her to a dance class because she seems to have rhythm in her. So she sent me thinking I would come back, calmer, tired.
There was no dancing in your family.
No, well,
Did
my
father's
first cousin was a very famous dance teacher, but then she got married and then she moved to Canada or America.
What was her name?
Her name was Kalanidhi Narayanan, who passed away a few years ago.
What was her style?
Bharatanatyam, what I do. But she learned from the old teachers. So what I mean by the old teachers is the hereditary teachers of the form. See, I haven't learned it that way. So I'm already one removed from what a hereditary teacher might have learned from the temple ritual. So
I'm sorry,
No,
it's really interesting to me. What is a hereditary teacher?
So the hereditary teacher is, this form was originally tied symbolically to the Hindu temples.
Yes, right.
So there was a young woman who was donated, in quotes, to the temple, and therefore she was obliged to learn the services to that temple and that god there. And she was symbolically married to the god. So she became the eternal bride. She came from, we could say loosely, a caste of dancers who did not belong to the four regular castes. So in some way she was an outcast, so she never really did the work of the others, like the Brahmin or the ruler or the peasant. But she had to conduct the rituals with the priest. And whatever the priest did in the temples, for instance, if he used his hand to put something in, now that would become more stylized and that would go right there in front of the god. If he showed the fire in front of the god as a blessing, an act of blessing and offering, she would take it stylistically and do very similar things. So they were very intermarried, the gestures and the symbols connected to that. And the whole point was about the yearning for the union between the mortal and the immortal. She represented the mortal, and of course there was the immortal, but she was his bride, which means that lifelong she would yearn to be in union with him.
Well, there's all sorts of echoes with for instance, most nuns are, quote, married to Christ.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And then there are and I think in ancient Rome, weren't there the Vestal Virgins?
Yes, the Vestal Virgins.
Yes.
But you struck upon a very interesting word called virgins.
Mm-hmm.
But this bride, wasn't really expected to be a virgin in the sense, she didn't sort of sell her wares around. She always had a very high level patron who looked after her. So in some ways, physically, in the mortal sense, she did, sort of consummate a physical relationship and union with a high-paying patron. So when she'd have a child, the patron's obligation was that they would have enough money to grow up and then to groom the next generation.
But he didn't have to consecrate their relationship with marriage.
No. Now, he would already be married. And his wife would probably look at this not just as a mistress, but somebody auspicious. Because she was married to the god.
Yes.
And Bharatanatyam is literally from it was derived from the sculptures themselves, right?
Yeah.
So I always thought it was in terms of a hierarchy, it was the most classical form.
It is one of the most ancient forms.
Ancient.
So when you trace its history, it's evolved through time. There's an unbroken evolution in this form. Some people will say it's 2,500 years old, but I would say it traces its history to a period where it was more regional areas in what we call currently India. Depending on the kingdoms that were there, the map constantly changed. So because the maps changed and the conquering groups changed, the dance forms and music forms themselves were affected by the local kings. For example, we had Muslim rulers. Suddenly,
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, so suddenly in the form you'd have things like this, which is a very Islamic way of saluting. But it would be in what we now call a Bharatanatyam piece. It would be in that. Like there'll be a word called salam, which is not a Dravidian language.
So the Muslims didn't repress this extremely. It's Hindu, the whole concept, and they allowed it.
Yes. On an average, you found a lot of assimilation rather than destruction, especially in the south, because we had a lot of trade. So when traders came in, naturally there was more assimilation. When I first came to this country, I lived in the Midwest.
Where?
In Indiana. So living there gave me a very different perspective of what America was. I had toured America before. I had come touring with my teacher's company, and we toured.
Who was that?
Those are my teachers back in India. They're called VP and Shanta Dhananjayan, and they are the disciples of Rukmani Devi, who established Kalakshetra. So I come directly from that lineage, and in their touring years, I was one of their young dancers, and we toured about 31 cities in the US every time we came here within 2 months, something like that. So a lot of different kinds of Indian families that we encountered all over America, their need for a cultural heritage for their children, which was very new to me because I didn't come from a country that talked about cultural heritage. We were just born in it. So I didn't have to stand up and talk about it. Most of the time we didn't even wear the Indian clothes, we were just listening to Michael Jackson. Or I was more interested in seeing Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire than going to my Bharatanatyam dance class. I knew my Fiddler on the Roof dancing more than I did my repertoire piece. So, so that is like young India in some ways. And coming over here, we suddenly had to meet with Indians over here who looked at us like we were gold dust. And what we wore mattered, and how we did our dance mattered suddenly, and that set me thinking as to so what is this about? At the time we were learning it too, we were on display for the marriage market.
For the marriage market, looking for a husband for you.
For us, yes, where the parents would talk, saying, "Oh, look at her," and then the graduation would be a way to showcase the dancer. So somebody's friend would come and say, "Oh." Talk to my father and say, "Oh, so your daughter's so pretty and so smart and so beautiful on stage. So I have a son who's and they'd have this conversation, and very soon you'd have marriage proposals." But beyond all that, there was a question of who I was. And then it became a dialogue of So this dance is me, and I am this dance. It's not what my teachers have put on me. It's not on display.
Mm-hmm.
Now when I am teaching young children in this country, am I going to make them presentational and ready for their marriage market? Around that same time, I started talking with Paul Kaiser, who we both know well, and he wanted to work with my hand gestures, symbols, as a diptych to what he did with Merce Cunningham's loops.
Mm-hmm.
So he just thought the two would be really in contrast with each other. And as we started talking, he started writing a book called Amongst Others, where he started meeting with friends and strangers and started extracting stories from them, their own stories.
Mm-hmm.
So he came and said, I just want to talk to you about stories. And I said, okay, come home for chai. And we were having chai and, and he had this little microphone and he said, okay, now tell me a story. And then, as Paul normally would do, he kept interrupting every now and then and asking, but how do you do that? And why do you say that? And is this really true? So it started becoming a big dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And very soon he had extracted a good number of stories from me. And we suddenly...
What were the nature of the stories?
The nature of the stories were all my experiences through my travels, growing up in India, my first marriage, my divorce, being married to an Englishman now, being a mother, losing a grandparent, those kind of things. And so I just went from one to the next, and what fascinated me about India and what didn't. And so he started writing these things down, and he said, I think this is where it is. These are your stories.
Mm-hmm.
This is what people should know about, and that's how they're going to access your very symbolic hand gestures. So we started talking about this and started developing it a little bit, and when I got the residency here, the live feed, it became the perfect platform for it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was right at that juncture of when you asked me the question, why downtown? And I would say, what is uptown, in my mind, or what is downtown indeed. But to me, this place housed a place for storytelling that no other place that I can see in New York houses. So this piece that I'm creating, that I'm going to premiere very soon, really is about that space of vulnerability, revealing an identity through my memories. And why that's important for me right now is because on one hand, almost all the stories are universal.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives immediate access to people. If my grandfather died, so did yours.
Mm-hmm.
Or somebody else did. So you have access to that. If somebody had a mental disorder and did something, you might know of somebody, even through news, or you traveled somewhere.
But let's talk about the form, though, because the form is, quote, exotic to the eyes of the audience that you have here.
Yes. Yes.
And so what does that mean that you've got to? How do you break their eyes down? Stop looking at me as an other. Do you want me to not look at you as an other? Do you want me to look at you as just another New Yorker?
The easy answer to that would be, that's up to you. But the more difficult answer would be, I think I'm choreographing it for you as you see me being revealed. I think my first choice is you will not see me with the exotic costume or the makeup or what you think is an Indian classical dancer or what you've been used to seeing here in the theatres or the reviews. When you read the reviews, you're looking for certain postures or positions. I'm not giving you that. I'm revealing to you how I'm addressing them to myself. So then it becomes personal. And through my journeys, you see how this language is a personal language right now. We all speak with our hands. That's another universal thing, right? But my hands, if I started speaking about my story, but started using stylized gestures, all of a sudden that story that's universal is giving you access to that what you think are symbols. It breaks that too. It breaks that barrier.
I want to know what Uganesh is.
Yeah.
I want to know, is it Yama? Is it called?
Yama is the god of death.
Yes, but also in China as well.
Yes,
It's
Yama, yeah.
So
this, and then I'm now mesmerized by a whole cosmology
Yeah.
of otherness.
Yeah.
And I think you're saying, yes, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
Yes, there is Ganesh, there is Shiva, there is Vishnu, there is Brahma, but and I have that in me, and
Yes.
this gesture and so on. But ultimately, I'm talking to you as a 20th century person
Totally.
who is revealing herself,
Yeah.
and by revealing herself, I am speaking for both of us, our humanity.
Totally.
Is that
And
fair to say?
and it's a very current dialogue.
Mhm.
So absolutely, and I think that is really where it is, where I'm not too busy trying to explain. So I would say that, you know, because memory is so fickle, we think we remember things very well, but we don't, and it keeps shifting.
Well, supposedly they tell us that memories are recreated every time we have them.
Yeah,
You know, we're remembering the last
the
one,
last one, yeah.
which is kind of scary, isn't
It
it?
is. But then we also create a new patchwork. It's like,
Yeah.
this is me, Preeti, now.
Mhm.
Like 5 years ago, just a different Preeti. But somehow, you know, you see shades of me from that Preeti then.
Mhm.
But I'm just slightly altered because of how I'm perceiving that memory that I talked about. And I had a very interesting example of experience in India. My brother was there with his family. My brother, my mother, my father and I were just chatting. We were talking about reminiscing some holiday when we were young. And I said, oh, do you remember we had that moment? And my brother says, yeah. And then he describes it in a way. And my dad describes that whole thing. My mother describes the whole thing. And I just stopped and I went, what are we talking about?
All different, huh?
All different, but it was the same holiday. It was the same, you know, some things were true.
Mhm, mhm.
But each one of us had a completely different mind, you know, like memory of it.
Mm.
And there's a story in this I talk about my grandfather, for instance, or my grandmother, and my mother has no recollection of those things. She says, was he really like that? Did your grandmother do that? I'm like, yeah, you were just in the other room. She goes, oh. And so it's, you know, so it's even somebody as intimate as my own parents are getting to know me as a person
Mhm.
through, because I sent them some of the showings, the video of the showings. And they were sometimes disturbed by what I was revealing. Because to them it was discreet, it's family information. And I thought, yes, but it's also universal.
Well, you know, it's interesting that I feel this is close to home for me as well. Why the personal material? And I think it had something to do with what I thought modern art was supposed to be. Modern art after Freud, modern art after Karl Marx, modern art after the demise of colonialism.
Yes.
Has it been?
Has it?
Has it?
Has
Good
it?
point. Modern art after with the advent of technology and all. So I thought that one can get lost in that. And for years I used to say, and I still believe it, in talking to Tricia, for instance, and I say, you know, I'm not really so concerned about the original. I'm concerned about the authentic. Now there's that word
That
again.
word again, yeah.
And why is it important? Because I felt that in the discourse of the art world that I come up in, even with Mr. Ailey up there, Mr. Ailey and I came from different worlds,
Yes.
that I thought just by you standing on stage and talking about your experience honestly
Yeah.
is already changing the discourse.
Yes.
And I was
Yes.
about changing the discourse.
Yes. There's a moment of just letting go in some ways, because I think I've been holding on to a lot of the right things to do, because you're sort of brought up that way. You know, be a very good wife, be a good mother. You know, it just comes. Sometimes I just completely despise myself by doing that. I wake up in the morning, I make tea for everybody. Well, why? I'm not going to make tea today. What's wrong? But my body won't let me. I want to sit down. I just go and make it because it's a habit, you know, and it's been ingrained in you from when you're very young. You know, if somebody comes home, this is what you do, which a lot of times culturally it's very lovely, but then personally also thinking, but I don't want to do it. What do I do? So you're battling with yourself all the time, and that was a lot with my own dance form. It's like when I was going through the different transformations of my classical dance, I would say that I love my classical dance. My classical dance, Bharatanatyam, is my seed ground. But I can't make myself up in those costumes and bells and get up and do a dance on Radha Krishna like how I used to do before.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would just feel completely it's out of my skin. It's like I would just go, but that's not me.
You are. I would like it if I saw you come out and look like what I think. But there's this notion. I think a classical dancer should be, and then she's telling these stories. Now what that would mean, you would be assaulting my expectations, and I would learn something about my eyes and my heart. But you're going already a step past that. You're paying me a compliment. That I don't need. You don't need the ironic costuming for me to look behind. You're going to be a contemporary woman, just there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I think that irony has been done many times, and I really don't know the purpose of that right now until it comes back to say I need to be here. And I have to be honest with that. Either I am not ready for it, or it's not ready to dialogue with me. And there's enough irony anyway. So, so I feel that something like costuming, for instance, and there is, in this piece there is, and we're playing with the whole idea of it. And Robert is lighting my piece, which is great. So we were having a great dialogue, and how he saw aspects of it. He saw a tentative run through, and we had a lot of conversations about not just the body and not just the form, but also of cultural symbols. We're drawing through his lighting and set design. We're actually drawing lines on the floor, like how in southern India we draw patterns on the floor with rice flour every single day, and that becomes a meditative aspect. That becomes a way to designate who you are. That becomes my space, your space. That becomes shared space. So we're playing with that on a larger scale on the stage. And there's something about making something banal there. To me, coming from a highly stylized form, which itself heightens things and displaces it. But at this point, I just feel like, well, if I just make it banal, it's going to supersede the heightening also. It's going to go like that. Because all of a sudden, it's so strangely removed and yet intimate.
And I have to really struggle, and this is good struggle for me as an audience. I have to, what is she doing? First of all, I wonder what order the question is asked. Who is she doing it?
Yes.
Why is she doing it?
Yeah.
And what is she doing? Or is it, what is she doing? Why is she doing it? And who is she? Which order do you like? Which order do you like?
I wouldn't know until I do it.